Policy Committee.
Rita Abbott, City of Chicago.
Carolyn Schofield, representing McHenry County.
Aaron Alamon, CMAP.
Diane Williams, South Suburban Cook.
Good morning, Rick Reinbold, South Suburban Cook.
Matt Walsh, Western Cook County.
Karen Darch, Northwest Cook County.
And on the phone?
John Note.
Christopher Healy, Page County, Illinois.
Ann Sheehan, City of Chicago.
We have Mayor
And you
Note,
got Matt Brawley from Montgomery.
Mayor Brawley, Ann Sheehan, and was there somebody else? Jim Healy?
Christopher Healy,
Oh, great.
Christopher Healy, Page County, Illinois.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so are there any agenda changes or announcements?
So I think we do have one agenda change, just noting that you were present at the last.
Okay, yeah, and the approval of minutes, so moving into that, the approval of the minutes, that's okay. So with that, I wanted to make the change that I actually was present versus via teleconference. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the January 8th, 2020 meeting?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
All right, any other changes? Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so we will move on to the Executive Director's Report. Erin?
Well, great. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to talk a little bit about ON to 2050 implementation. That's going to be sort of one of the highlights that I'd like to bring to this meeting so that we can make sure that we're focusing on implementing the goals of 2050 and remind you of how we're doing that. So part of what we have been doing over the past few months is really getting ready to prepare for next year's work plan. And as part of this, we've done some strategic planning internally, and then we've also talked about developing some core values for CMAP to help us as we frame the work that we have here and to help us really focus on what it is we're trying to do with staff. So we have just a brief overview of our core values here that I wanted to share with you today. So the first core value is really to serve with passion. As we went through this process with our staff to talk about who we are as an agency and what we care about, this concept of public service came up time and time again, that we, really build trust and are good stewards of public resources. So that's our first core value. The next core value is pursue equity. This was one of the core themes, inclusive growth of On to 2050, but as we think about the region and the diversity of the communities that we have here, for us, a successful region really incorporates all of those communities equally, but the way that we do that may have to be using different strategies. So we thought equity was also one of our core values here that we wanted to include in that. Thirdly, foster collaboration. So the collaboration and the collaborative processes that we go through here at CMAP are core and fundamental to us making progress. It's through these conversations that we create more sustainable solutions for the region. So that's the third core value. Leading with excellence, again, our time as an MPO, as CMAP, really thinking about how we bring that data-driven, transparent, reputable information to folks across the region. So excellence in leadership is our fourth goal. And the fifth core value is to drive innovation. So, again, moving forward and trying to implement these strategies really requires us to look beyond sort of the typical solutions and bring forward where there are opportunities to solve old problems and take some calculated risks so that we can reap rewards as a region and as a regional agency here. So I wanted to share those with you because you'll see them reflected in the work plan, and you'll see us continue to talk about how these core values really help us focus our vision, drive the development and selection of the projects that we're working on moving forward. So I just appreciate you taking a moment here and letting me walk you through those. Our work plan is due to IDOT May 1st, I believe. I keep saying this, but again, it's a little bit different than in previous years. So we are, in the process of working hard to develop that right now. One of the other things that we are working on is developing some resources and thinking through how we might dig into the state revenue sharing project that we have outlined in our work. It's something that we've done historically here at CMAP in terms of thinking about how the way that the state disperses resources to communities helps people or hinders communities from achieving their goals here. So one of the things that we will be starting up in the next couple months is really continuing to explore the challenges with our state and local tax structures, but also find opportunities to understand how local communities are really adapting to fiscal challenges. And so as we explore these challenges, we want to identify possible solutions to moving forward, and figuring out how there might be opportunities to talk about how other states are leveraging state resources, or how our state might think about revenues like income, the sales tax use, and other taxes that go to local governments. So the entire process is really intended to be collaborative, and work with the region on potential solutions. So we are just initially scoping this, but we are interested in our board members' feedback on who we might want to talk to, who would have valuable perspectives for us to talk to. So whether it's finance directors from communities, from counties, or other folks that deal with these issues on a daily basis, those would be excellent resources for us to reach out to. So we'd love to get your ideas and concepts on who we should be talking to. So I think with that, I'm just getting back from DC and wanted to provide you just one other little highlight on, I was at the National Association for Regional Councils conference. I was there representing the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus and CMAP, because in partnership, we're working with the Global Covenant of Mayors on some climate emissions reduction strategies here. So we're one of 4 pilot areas that they've selected across the country to work with and provide technical assistance to help figure out if there are ways that regions can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions together. And so Edith Macro from the Mayor's Caucus has had the opportunity to go to Europe and meet with our foreign counterparts and learn what they're doing to collaborate on these issues. And it has been pretty exciting. They're excited to help provide us technical assistance and help us think through strategies for local governments as well. Let's see, I've got a whole bunch of other notes here, so I'm skipping around a little bit. Local dues, we have collected about 60% of our local dues, so we are on track to continue to collect our total local dues that we have seen typically in the past few years, but we will be continuing to send reminders to folks that haven't paid those local dues. And then the other thing I wanted to share with you is that I will be out in the region talking to the COGs in the counties. Tomorrow I'm at McHenry County. Last week I was at Lake County with Amy McEwen, our Chief of Staff, to just remind folks that we're here to be a partner to you, to share the information and data that we collect here, but just to talk about how we can continue to be a resource to the COGs and also to the counties as you pursue the work that you're doing. So with that, I will turn it back over to Carolyn.
Any questions? All right, great, thank you. So next, item 5.0, procurements and contract approvals. Angela.
Good morning, CMAP Board. Today I'm seeking approval. I have a sore throat again, irony. Today I'm seeking your approval for 4 contracts and 1 intergovernmental agreement. Seeking approval to enter into a contract with TESCA to conduct the DuPage County Lake Street Zoning Overlay District project. Seeking approval to increase the vendor limit for power construction from $312,000 to $4.6 million to include general contractor services, construction, low voltage cabling, security, audio visual equipment, and the electric decommissioning of existing furniture. So they will basically decommission the furniture here at existing location. If you recall, at our November 13th board meeting, I mentioned that once construction cost was confirmed and our final guaranteed maximum pricing determined, I would return to the board for approval for the full scope and the cost of the contract. So this is the full scope, $4.6 million. In addition, we committed to exploring minority participation on this contract. Power Construction was successful in securing 40% minority participation, 34% MEB, and 6% WEB participation. In terms of dollars, this participation equals $1.8 million. The work performed by these vendors will include carpentry, plumbing, HVAC, electrical, and cabling work. I'm seeking approval to enter into a contract with Hendrickson All Steel for the delivery, installation, and purchase of office furniture for the post office location. This RFP was for only cubicle and office furniture, which is desk chairs and shelving systems. A second bid will be issued for all the other furniture in the coming months. Seeking approval to enter into contracts with 28 vendors listed on page 5 of your packet in a related memo to provide advisory civil engineering services in the areas of transportation, stormwater and flooding, water supply, water quality, capital asset assessment, and capital improvement planning, and municipal finance and administrative consulting services. And finally, seeking board approval to enter into an intergovernment agreement with the Cook County Assessor's Office to gain access to their GIS database. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Yes.
Yeah, Angela, I just wanted to highlight you and say thank you for taking or listening to some of the things that the board has said with regard to minority participation, with regard to the power construction contract, item 5.2. This is not something that I understand CMAP to be or statutorily obligated to do as far as EV-WEB participation. So I did want to take a second to highlight you and your team as far as getting 40% minority participation. I think this is a great step forward. Aaron just talked about the core values, and one of the core values, excuse me, is pursuing equity. I think this speaks right to that. And I think it's really symbolic of the organization moving to the old post office and what this means for the organization moving forward. So I did want to take a second to highlight you and your team and Aaron for doing that. I mean, definitely, this is a big deal. I am going to ask, is this something that CMAP is looking to do moving forward with all of its contracts? So I read this book, I forget what it was, but I remember this quote, and it said, with everything you do, you should always look to go from good to great. I think this is really good. How can you take it to the next level? So that's just something, it doesn't necessarily need to be discussed here, but is this something that CMAP may consider obligating in the forward or moving forward with regard to its contracts? Just food for thought. But thank you.
Yeah, well, I'll say that, Angela and her team continues to think about how we make this happen. I think that, us being a sub-grantee of federal funds means that some of the funds are, restricted to what the federal law says in terms of the program. And we've been thinking and talking to our peers about what it means to do a disparity study, which would set the goals for the region, and talking to IDOT about whether or not, we adopt theirs or ours. And so we're really in the process of evaluating what makes the most sense for us in the budgets that we have and sort of these extra pots of money that aren't necessarily related to the federal transportation dollars that we have. So I think that, we want to be more intentional about the work that we're pursuing, and also, the contracting opportunities that we have available for firms. And even as small as I think when we, have the opportunity, which is rare, to bring in lunch for some of the, strategic planning sessions that we have, that we aren't thinking, corner bakery because it's easy, but that we're taking a step back and saying, like, who else in this region is looking for that, that assistance, and how can we help support those local businesses? So, more to come on this. We don't have any answers here, but we have been trying to be more intentional about the decisions that we're making.
So I would just add one comment. I too am pleased, obviously, with how CMAP has responded to this, but Angela actually responds beyond that. She's made herself available to our village to talk about looking for minority vendors and those kinds of things based on her experience prior to coming to CMAP and what she was doing at CMAP today as well. So she's really sort of spreading it, if you will.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angela.
Any other
I need
questions?
approval.
Okay,
No.
Frank?
Well, as long as we're complimenting. I'd like to compliment the staff on the DuPage County Lake Street zoning change. I think that's exactly the kind of LTA project we need. It's got 3 municipalities, the county, and tries to integrate their interests with an overlay zoning district. It's very creative. Glad to see it on the list.
Thanks, Frank.
Any other questions or comments for us? I'll entertain a motion to approve items 5.1 to 5.5, or if you'd like to do them individually, whichever.
Do them as a group.
Move to approve.
Second?
All right, so a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So item number 6.0, committee reports. There is a written summary of the working committees and the council of mayors executive committee at your place.
No, mine just-
And there's nothing else to report on that. So 7.0, 2020 federal agenda and reauthorization principles. Jeff.
Thank you, Chair, Board. So I'm here to ask for your approval of this document, and then after that, provide an informational update on an interesting development at the federal level as well. So the 2020 Federal Agenda and Reauthorization Principles is a document that we use in discussions with our congressional delegation and other partners at the federal level. Comes in handy for visits like the one that Aaron just did to DC in talking with members of Congress and their staff. It's a pretty high-level document, pretty concise principles, but we think it provides a digestible form for them to take this information in. So there was a draft of this that came to you last month. As a reminder, it consists of surface transportation reauthorization principles on pages 4 and 5. Those are, for this time around, ensure sustainable funding, align funding with national performance goals, support goods movement and address community impacts, address climate change, and establish a stronger role for regions. And we include those this time around because the reauthorization is expiring this coming fall. But then the more traditional federal agenda also includes recommendations beyond just surface transportation across basically all of the subjects that On to 2050 covers. So the changes from the January version that you saw are relatively minor. There is one new support statement that we added. It is that CMAP supports continued funding for transit from the Highway Trust Fund and other transportation system user fees. It's kind of an obvious statement. I don't think it would be very contentious to most, but we thought that making that explicit was important. And then the other changes are predominantly wordsmithing and reorganization.
Yeah, I wanted to add just, Jeff, unless you were going to go through it in more detail, just how we used this when I was in DC recently.
No, go ahead.
Great. So yesterday, I went to DC with Laura Wilkeson, who's here, who's here helping us with strategize on our federal agenda and how we're going to utilize this. So when we were in DC, we had the opportunity to meet with most of our congressional delegation. We met with both Senator Duckworth and Durbin's office, but we also had the opportunity to meet with a number of our newer congressional representatives as well to talk with them about not only just who CMAP is, because as we see this turnover, that's an opportunity that I want to make sure that they are aware of, that as they're looking to projects that are going to happen in the district, as they're looking to understand how different policies would impact their district offices, that our staff is here and available to provide information to them. But also just to hear from them about what their priorities are going to be for the next year or so. And while, I think things probably aren't going to move quickly over this next year with it being an election year, we did hear from most of our representatives that now is the time for us to be engaged on conversations in regards to policy for the federal transportation bill reauthorization. So both all of the committees that are involved in drafting the transportation bill seem to be putting those gears in motion right now. And so I think for us as a region, getting involved with that now makes sense. So whether or not, that transportation bill gets reauthorized, I imagine there will be some continuing resolutions for a little while, but we want to be ahead of the policy changes, and we think that being out there and talking to them about what we want to see new in the transportation bill is the time is of the essence right now. I think we also heard a lot from our delegation about how important addressing climate and resiliency is through transportation infrastructure investments, which was positive to hear. We also heard a lot from our delegation too about workforce and housing issues as well. So they really are seeing this as, transportation is driving the development of our region, of regions across the country, and that it's more than just transportation for transportation's sake. So our delegation is really focused on how can we leverage these federal transportation dollars, how can we think about the Housing Trust Fund dollars, how can we really bring the environmental dollars that we are spent in this region together to achieve greater benefits. So we also heard that your voice from the local level is critically important as they move forward too. So one of the things that they highlighted that had come out of this region in the past was really that, as much as we can be in lockstep as a region, from the city of Chicago to the communities in Cook County, to all of the collar counties, DuPage, Kane, Kendall, Lake, McHenry, Will, right? Us speaking as a region really helps them be able to advocate for us better. So I think as we move forward, as we see opportunities, we want to make sure that we're aligning, you all and that you're bringing your issues and ideas to us too, so that we can make sure that we have this joint agenda moving forward. I think that that was another thing that we heard loud and clear. And then, we reminded our delegation that they could look to us for leadership on specific ideas, as we were talking with, who were you talking to at the end of the day? Well, one of the things that came up was this idea of really going back and looking at FEMA and how FEMA spends its money very reactively. But is there an opportunity to start spending that money more proactively? And so we highlighted the flooding susceptibility index that we had just accomplished. And, essentially, what we heard from one of our representatives was that they had an idea that we should probably be doing this, but that we were a little bit ahead of where they thought that regions were. And so that was exciting to hear, and I think that we're going to be able to provide them some valuable information as to how much might a pilot cost if you were going to go back and do a susceptibility index that was going to help inform how you spent federal dollars on disaster recovery related to flooding. So that was an exciting sort of recap of my conversations with many of our congressional representatives out yesterday. And then also, I'll just note that we had a Federal Highway Administrator, Nason, at our NARC conference as well, and she too was highlighting the value that regions play. Now, granted, she was, speaking to the audience that she was in front of, but I think a couple of things that came out of that really was just that, safety, again, is going to continue to be a core component of what FHWA always does, but that she saw a role for regions to be proactive because they are closer to the local level in dealing with safety. She talked a lot about small-scale solutions to be able to make dollars go farther, like traffic beacons for pedestrian infrastructure, because that's a more efficient way for them to address some of these safety issues than building, a pedestrian overpass, right? That's just, you could put in a ton of beacons. She specifically kept talking about how humans have really trained themselves to respond well to flashing lights, right? So if you have a beacon and starts flashing, humans know what to do. So she was very positive in terms of where our relationship should continue to be with our federal partners, and I was excited to hear from her. But again, I think we're hearing some positive stuff from our delegation in terms of how we can interact with them and help influence and educate them on how our region could be of value to our congressional delegates. So I'm happy to answer any questions about other things and I know Jeff too, if you have questions about our federal agenda.
Thank you. Any questions?
Then Jeff, did you have one other thing?
Yeah, I was just going to talk a bit about the framework plan that the House Democrats released last week or a couple weeks ago. So it's just one step in the process. As a reminder, on reauthorization, you have to have at least 6 congressional committees take action. Only one has really done so far, the Senate EPW committee last summer. So what this document that the House Democrats released, pretty small document, only 20 pages or so, doesn't look a lot like a bill, and it's not. It's just principles, not legislative text. But it represents a committee taking a step forward. And as Aaron mentioned, this is really the time that they're putting pen to paper on the specific legislative proposals that they want to get enacted. So it released principles, high-level dollar amounts. As I mentioned, not legislative text. I'll go through it briefly in a second. I would note that it wasn't a bipartisan release. The House Republicans released some principles separately. That's different from what happened with the Senate EPW committee, where it was a bipartisan release and unanimous vote. But what we did is took a look at how those principles aligned with our principles, and that's one of the reasons that we put things like this together, is to have sort of a framework for analyzing what these proposals, how they are reactive to or not to our principles. So going through those, ensure sustainable funding is one of our principles. The document that the House Democrats released calls for an increase in funding, but doesn't identify a funding source. They talk about the importance of user fees, which is good, but they went to the ever popular, we're going to work with the administration, we're going to work with our other partners to figure this out. So no specifics on paying for the program if they did decide to pay for it and not just deficit spend. The second principle that we have is align funding with national performance goals. There were some interesting language in this proposal related to revamping existing formula programs. We don't know exactly what that looks like, but that could be interesting, could be good. It also talks about requiring states and MPOs to prioritize transportation access and to consider during the planning process all system users, job access, connections to housing, and creation of transportation options in underserved communities. So that was a sentence that we were excited to see. We're excited to see what the language that they plan to release to carry that out would be. The devil's always in the details, but a good step there. Our third principle, support goods movement and address community impacts. So the freight programs, the framework talks about continuing, talks about removing multimodal caps on projects, which we think is important, but there wasn't really much detail on community impacts. So again, we'll wait to see legislative language. Address climate change is a new principle that's in our document, and this is something where it looks like we're really aligned with this framework plan that was released. Talks about alternative fuel infrastructure, talks a lot about carbon pollution reduction, talks about resiliency, talks about mitigating greenhouse gas pollution with transit. So these are all things that we're really excited to see. The document really does talk the talk, but again, we'll see what happens when legislative language is released. And then the last one of our principles is establish a stronger role for regions. And there is we're really excited to see some language in the House Democrats document on expanding local control. So expand decision-making over federal funds to other levels of government, provide additional authority to MPOs that demonstrate the capacity to administer federal funds. So again, good sign, and we are excited to see what that looks like in terms of text. So just wanted to provide that sort of high-level overview. There's a lot more information in that document, and we'll continue to track this as it moves through the process.
Any questions for Jeff? Otherwise, I will entertain a motion to approve the federal agenda and reauthorization principles.
So moved.
Second.
Second, got a motion and a second. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you very much, Jeff. So next item on the agenda, state legislative update, and Tim will provide the state legislative update in Gordon's absence today.
Good morning. My name is Tim McMahon. I work on the government affairs team here with Gordon. Gordon's out sick, so I'll be giving a brief legislative update to give you a sense of what we're looking at in Springfield. So session began on Tuesday, January 28th. The governor delivered his State of the State. He touched upon ethics reform as well as negotiating a new energy bill, likely building off the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Caucus leadership have publicly stated that passing a balanced budget is their top priority. The governor's budget address will not happen until February 19th. We're also looking at a change in the Senate Transportation Committee. Senator Ram Vilivalam was named chair of the Transportation Committee. He served as vice chair last year. CMAP staff, specifically Gordon and Anthony, have met with him a number of times to discuss performance-based programming as well as other legislative initiatives that we're looking at. This Friday is the deadline for introducing bills. So these are a few of the dates that we're looking at. So that's February 14th, followed by a staggered schedule that includes the Illinois primary on March 17th. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. The committee deadline for bills is March 27th. And then considering the Illinois General Assembly schedule, CMAP staff doesn't anticipate bringing bills to the board for consideration until the April meeting. Staff is currently pursuing the agenda items outlined in the 2020 agenda that you all passed at the last meeting, particularly with regards to CMAP's funding. So with that, that's what we are tracking, and you can anticipate a list of bills that we reviewed at the April meeting.
Are there any questions? All right, this was for informational purposes only, so thank you very much, Tim.
Thanks.
Any other business? Is there any further business to discuss? Anyone? Our next meeting is March 11th. And I will now open up to public comment. If there's any comment from the public. Rylan.
Good morning. Just want y'all to know about the Northwest Highway in Des Plaines. Every time when I seen people crossing over when they get off the Pace bus going right to the Cumberland Metro Station, there is no push button like the one they have at right on the northwest side of Chicago by Higgins when they're going from the sidewalk over to the train station. And the only thing they don't have one is at the Cumberland Metro Station in Des Plaines of the UP Northwest line. And then they also don't have one at Des Plaines too for the crosswalk when they're going to the Des Plaines train station. So I think they need to get some push buttons there, especially pedestrians, like what happened about a year or 2 years ago when a pedestrian got hit right there on Minor Street, right there using that crosswalk, and where the push buttons for that. So because we don't want another incident to happen, to have another pedestrian get hit. So that's one of the busiest streets of the mall. So you need to get a push button, especially when those pedestrians are crossing over, going from the train station to the bus stop or from the bus to the train station at Cumberland, and the same thing to a Des Plaines Metro Station too, when they're going to the train station or coming from the train station. So it'll be a lot safer, so they don't have to walk all the way over to where the traffic light is, either by Pearson or Lee Street. So need to get that in, because God forbids, we don't know when another person will be hit in that area down the road.
Thank you. We'll look at the roads and reach out to the appropriate entity to convey those concerns. Thanks, Gardlin.
All right.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wishing to speak? All right, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All right, and all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. I know Mayor Becker was a quick meeting, but we're good.